Hello and welcome to the Arsenal Bite-Sized Podcast. I'm your host Clayton and we're here today to review the big one. We beat Tottenham at home. We won the North London derby. It's going to be a great episode. Got Simon Collings from The Standard here to review the game with me as well as talk through some of the topics I'll get into in a minute. But first of all, Simon, welcome to the pod. How are you feeling this morning? Well, I say this
I'm
morning, it's
good.
this afternoon, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm a little tired after last night. Yeah, but I'm doing good. And when we arranged to have a chat, I was wondering what the mood was going to be on when we came to speak. But at least we're talking in sort of happy circumstances. So
Exactly. And just to give a bit of context in terms of what we will be talking about, the topics were all agreed prior to the result. So it was obviously going to be a review of the North London derby, regardless of the result. There's a lot of talk around Myles Lewis-Skelly, even more so after last night in terms of what's his long-term positioning. There's a lot of talk about Jorginho, Partey leaving in the summer, Zubimendi potentially coming in the summer. So a lot of talk about the midfield that we'll touch on later on. It feels weird to kind of talk about this given the mood at the minute, but there has been a lot of online discourse in the last week or two around like where are we as a football club, where are we under Arteta. So I think it'd be great to get your perspective on that. I'd love to share mine as well, and then I'm sure there's lots of trending things that will come up in conversation. But before we get into the big one from last night, I always love to ask Arsenal fans that come on this pod like a bit about their journey, how they got into supporting the club, but especially with you where your day job is actually covering the club, right? So could you share some information and some insight into your journey as a fan and how you kind of got into the line of work that you do as well?
yeah, I mean, my dad was a fan. My granddad was a fan. So it was kind of just passed down to me. Went to my first game. My first ever game was the double season 97-98, the final day, the victory over Everton, where I must admit I didn't see a single goal. I was 6 at the time, so I didn't see a single goal or any of the action really. But I remember, yeah, that was my first ever game that I went to, and then sort of went as often as I could with my dad. I always loved playing football as a kid, always dreamed of being a footballer like most people. Kind of realized wasn't going to make it. And like journalism was something that I wanted to do, like move in sports journalism. I did a degree and then did my journalism training after that. I started by years and years ago, probably over 10 years ago. I was doing like some sort of Arsenal fan podcast, just chatting about it. Started as a journalist in 2014. I was at an agency. I was covering all sorts. I was fairly lucky in that my first sort of club that I was doing or area that I was covering was Leicester. So I did the Leicester Great Escape season 14-15. I did them winning the league 15-16, a bit of them in the Champions League. And I was at that agency until January 2019 when I moved to the Standard. Started for them doing Watford and Palace. Moved on to Arsenal sort of around COVID time, and I've been doing them since then. So yeah, it's kind of weird covering the club you support, and I definitely don't think I'm as much as a fan as I used to be. I think that kind of does. You get a bit detached from it. It's probably like anything when you start doing it as a job, and almost my sort of desire for them to win is more born out of like for work. Like I want to be at the big games. I want to see them I want to be covering Champions League games, cup finals, and less so as a fan. So it's kind of a weird experience. Like I can't really remember the last time I watched an Arsenal game, with a pint and in the pub or in the stands. So it is a weird experience, but it is also great. Like, the sort of enjoyment of doing it, I don't think is going to compare to many other things I could do.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. I've never really thought of it from that perspective. Like you're literally describing it as you're not being able to kind of watch a game over a pie or a pint. And I was like, oh wow, yeah, that is a unique experience. So how like a game like last night, in my head, that's kind of biggest one of the season. Especially in the context of like the last 2 weeks, I was like really looking forward to last night. How was that experience for you? Because when I went to message you with everything, I saw your timeline. It was kind of reporting, so you were working at the game. How is a North London derby for you as an Arsenal fan, but working covering the club?
Yeah, I mean, it's normally the game I most look forward to because it's just normally such a crazy game. It's just a mad match. and it is quite a hectic game, and you get used to, certainly over the years, you get used to kind of detaching yourself from the emotion of it. Like I always remember, like years and years ago, when I was probably in my first sort of maybe year or so covering Arsenal, my brother and his friend were at the game, and they were sat in front of the press box, and like Arsenal had scored this goal, and they were sort of filming, and they turned around, and I was just sat there on my laptop, just like unmoved and motionless, and they were just cracking up at that. But you do almost like, that does almost happen. It's kind of, I mean, the perfect example is like the sort of ecstasy over a late goal. Thinking last night, if that Porro shot had gone in, I mean, the away end would have gone mad. The sort of home end would have been, and everyone in that press box would have been like, "Oh my word!" Like suddenly you're completely up against it, and things have got to dramatically change. So you almost have to detach yourself a little bit from it. I definitely do get there are moments with the job where you kind of have to just, just accept that it's a crazy experience. Like I was at the World Cup final in Qatar. When was that?
Oh, nice. 2022, wasn't it? Yeah,
2022, and that was like the craziest game. Like I remember being like, I know, as I was saying, I'm normally quite sort of reserved in the press box, but like as like Mbappe was scoring these goals, I was literally like grabbing my colleague. This is nuts, which is the best thing about it. But North London derby for me, I just enjoy it because it's just a crazy game. And I don't know if like as a fan, it always used to be my sort of, I don't know, didn't really enjoy it until the end. Like the whole time you're just on edge. It's just like, oh, this is be horrible, horrible. And then you win and then it's great. So
yeah, no, 100%. It's one of I was actually chatting to my mates about this yesterday. The North London derby for me. So I was born in '95. So a lot of my childhood, growing up, going to games was like we were dominant, and I think I wasn't old enough to truly appreciate maybe like the rivalry and the bragging rights and stuff. And then as I got to that age where I started to understand that, I think the gap between the two clubs was more narrow, and we were a bit more even. Even though I didn't want to admit it at the time, we were a bit more even in terms of levels of the club, in terms of quality on the pitch and stuff. But now I think, especially the last 2-3 years, we started to pull away massively, and I used to always get this level of anxiety, and like I couldn't eat and I'd feel sick on the day, and I don't really get that anymore. And even going into the game last night, despite the Man United and Newcastle results, I felt calm going into it yesterday. And I mean, I wasn't calm during the game. There was definitely periods I was pulling my hair out, but yeah, like shifting attention to that. What was your kind of overall thoughts on the performance last night, and how big a win was that in the context of this season?
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about it from the viewing it from the point of the job, and I was thinking like before the game, I was like, if they lose this, I know the requests from like the editors and the desk would be like, right, Arsenal in crisis, what's gone wrong? Like that would have been the narrative. Like it was just completely going to be there. And instead, like this morning, I was writing about, Myles Lewis-Skelly, the left back, 18-year-old, which is a much nicer piece to write than, the club are in crisis. And that was a feeling. So I thought it was a massive, massive, massive result. It was always going to be about the result. I mean, the performance, I don't know about you, I actually thought it was kind of pretty similar performance to the last two games, like loads of domination, created chances, didn't really take them. I think Rice was a bit bullish, saying they could have scored 10, but I definitely think, they could have had 4 or 5. Like Havertz had that great header, Odegaard had that great chance. And this time they probably got a bit of the luck they didn't have at all last week, like the corner, It's obviously not a corner. The keeper maybe should do better for that Trossard one. But I think Arteta will probably say, over those 3 games, they were due a bit of something going their way. And I just think it was so important. I mean, we said we'll touch on the mood later on, but just for the mood around everything, particularly after Liverpool had dropped points, that's happened a few times, and Arsenal haven't taken advantage just to get a result. And it's just that last third of the pitch, because I think a lot of the stuff they do is so good, and I thought they were pretty dominant for most of the game.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say that felt slightly different to me, and I don't know if this was me, like I'm a very emotional football fan. I think when I come and do podcasts, like I've processed things, I'm more rational. But in the 90 minutes where I'm there, I'm a very emotional person. And I don't know if I was influenced by this, but the atmosphere last night felt like the best it's been at home all season. And it really got me up for it as well. And I think, we'll touch on it later in terms of the overall mood. It's definitely felt a bit disjointed, a bit flat. I don't know how much of that is online versus in person, but the first 20 minutes, I thought we were outstanding. Not in the sense of it always translated into clear quality chances, but I just thought there was a real intent and an aggression and purpose in everything we were doing that I think has sometimes felt like it's been lacking in periods. Like against, I think I was on my own in terms of the Newcastle game. I looked at that as like first half, I thought we were good. Second half, awful. Man United, I thought after we got the equaliser, we looked good for a period until after the penalty. Then we didn't look good after that. But yesterday, I actually thought, especially that 20 minutes, it was more intense. I don't know how much of that was influenced by me kind of being in the crowd and soaking the atmosphere. Did you share that, or do you think not quite?
No, I did think they came out fast and hard, and I think that was quite a hallmark of the team when they had their best runs under Arteta, with these like fast starts, and it makes the game completely different. If you can get the early goal, which I know they didn't yesterday, but if you can get the early goal, it completely changes the game, and that was a trend that they were quite good at before.
Yeah.
And I think it's something they've lost a bit, and I don't know if that's because of injuries or the number of games. And I think that fed the atmosphere. And it was interesting. I mean, Arteta got asked quite a lot about the atmosphere pre-game. And it was a thing that myself and a few others wrote about. And it was interesting. I think what he said was, he did speak about, different elements and factors, but he kind of put it on the players and said, like, we're the ones who control it. And I think that is right. You can do all these things of flags, songs, fire, all that stuff.
Fireworks.
But at the end of the day, fireworks, exactly. You can do all that stuff. But if the players don't put the performance on the pitch, the fans won't get out of their seats. And I think that first 20 minutes, the way they pressed, the intent they had in the front foot, I think that translated to the crowd. And the crowd could almost see, okay, actually, that they're really going for this. And they feed off each other. It's a reciprocal thing. And I think that made a big difference. And that, I thought they were so dominant until that goal went in. And when the goal went in, that was the moment where I was like, oh, how is this going to go? What's the reaction going to be? And it was the reaction that it was, the last two seasons, which has kind of been lost a bit, that when the team have conceded, everyone gets up, they cheer. Like that has been a huge part of the good atmosphere, I think. And they did exactly that on last night. And I don't think that would have gone unnoticed from the players and Arteta, because that is something that he really does, hammer home and appreciate. And I think it's probably the best it's been for a while, and probably ends some of the chat that's been going on about the atmosphere.
Yeah, and Declan Rice obviously basically cited it directly with his interview to TNT, didn't he? Where he said you kind of have this online perception, and then he described it as the real fans in the stadium. And you could see the way, again, like, don't want to over-index things without being a body language expert, but he did feel like quite emotive in the way he was describing that. So I think it definitely rubs off on the players. But yeah, you're right. I feel like the last 2 years, the one that sticks out in my mind was Saliba when he scored an own goal against Leicester. And I think that season was the kind of unexpected title challenge, right? But everyone got behind him there and raised it. And I was nervous yesterday because I think I'd been conscious of some of the negativity doing the rounds. And I was wondering, is this going to seep in? But yeah, I think there was a moment of stunned silence. And I think once everyone recalibrated, it took a while to get going again. But then, we got going again, got the fortunate corner. But oh my God, I said this to you off air, didn't I? I've been nursing a foot injury, so I couldn't actually make the Man United and Newcastle game. I shouldn't have gone last night, but oh my God, my foot in the celebrations for we're calling it a Solanke own goal, aren't we? And the Trossard one, absolutely raucous. Yeah, the atmosphere hasn't been like that for a while this season. But yeah, it felt like, I don't know about you from the kind of job perspective, but for me as a fan, when I was in there, once we got the equaliser, I thought, we're going to go on and get this. How did you kind of feel when the equaliser went in?
The equaliser, and I felt like they kind of almost needed it before half time. I think when they got that goal, you could almost sense the momentum swing. And we spoke about it being familiar performance, and I mean, set piece again, so valuable in breaking up the game. But once they got that again, I think the atmosphere went up another level. And where the press box is at the Emirates is sort of it's in that same stand as the dugout, and it's kind of back at the end of that lower tier. So you are quite immersed in the fans. And it's normally a section where they're pretty strict on like having people sit down. But they basically just couldn't get anyone to sit down last night. They were like, no one was sitting down. And when that second goal went in, they were just honestly, it was like, I don't know how to describe it. It was just people just going crazy, standing on their seats, like, absolute proper bedlam. And maybe that's a bit of the past week kind of feeding into it. Like, it's been a difficult time and people just let it all out. But it was, it was the loudest it's been for some time. And also at the full-time whistle, I mean, it was it was noticeable how literally the full-time whistle went, and then instantly they put on North London Forever, like bang, straight away. And then that was a great moment as well. So yeah, felt like a really big night in the moment. And I think given where we are in the sort of season and the title race, I think Arsenal hope it's one they look back on and say, yeah, that was a big moment.
Yeah, 100%. And I've someone that's been on this emotional roller coaster. I think after Brighton, I was someone in the camp of it's done, it's over. Liverpool, who did they play that weekend? I can't remember. But then, was that the
The
Man United?
United weekend?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they drew the game after, yeah.
And then I was like, okay, I'm slightly roped back in. I remember saying it when my confidence levels went from like 0% to 5%. And then the way the last week has panned out, where they obviously dropped points against Forest the other night, us performing and getting the result the way we did last night, it brings it back to 4 points. With it, Liverpool have a game in hand, granted, but it's one of these. It's just going to be a roller coaster until the end of the season. But where's your headspace at right now in terms of, are we in the title race? What's the likelihood you think we can go on and do it?
Definitely in the title race. I mean, it's such a sort of mad one. It was interesting after that Brighton game. I saw some tweets on social media just being like, I'd maybe just rather, than the United get steamrolled by Liverpool, and I can almost get rid of the hope. Like, I'm just done by clinging on to that bit of hope. But I just feel like when it's, the gap of when it is, I mean, that the game in hand is obviously going to be crucial. I mean, Moyes will have a bit of time with Everton there. It's the last ever Merseyside derby at Goodison. I think it's a harder game than it would have looked maybe before, and probably would be in most seasons. So that is a small crumb of comfort. And then I just think the games Liverpool have, like, they've still got a lot of tough games. I mean, we know that this squad is very good on the stretch. We don't know what Slot's like. They haven't had any sort of major injuries, suspensions, disruptions. It's 21 games in. So I still think there is a chance for us. I mean, you have to put Liverpool as clear favourites. But I think Arsenal are definitely there. And I think really what they've got to try and do is just hang on in there until sort of March, April time, when hopefully you're going to get Saka back. You'll probably have the squad a bit more fit and just be in a position there where you can make it count. I think the concern I would have is that they go through this sort of run now, and by the time they get sort of Saka back, or hopefully a new forward bedded in, the distance is almost too much to make up. I think they've just got to cling on there and keep it close. And then when you get to that sort of last 10 games, if you're 4 points off, anything can happen. But yeah, they're definitely in it. And I think the sort of spirit they showed last night will probably be the thing Arteta will take most from that game. That, you had two pretty bruising games. Derby, you've got to win it. And they kind of found a way to get it done. So, massive result.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Saturday's performance is like against Villa now, because Odegaard, as soon as the final whistle went, he was on the floor. I think Havertz looks gassed out at the minute. A lot of them look fatigued, and I've always felt it was a knock-on impact of, I think, our injuries this season hasn't been like Brentford had when they were against us, where it's just one long list at one moment. Even Tottenham, to be fair, like, I have to acknowledge they didn't have basically their first choice back four last night and their goalkeeper. But the knock, it feels like our injuries this season have just been a domino effect, where it's like one or two are injured here, and as a result, the backup who would typically play isn't available. So we're then having to play people consistently. Like Timber, I'm a bit concerned about him because of how much he's having to play, but it's because White's not there, Tomiyasu's not there. But yeah, the performance on Saturday against Villa will be interesting, because like you said, these were quite big bruising games that we've just been through, and Villa's not going to be an easy one at all. But that kind of feeds into the general narrative at the minute around the transfer window, right? And like you kind of touched on it there, do we need a forward? I'm personally someone that thinks we'd need more attacking juice to be able to go on and take advantage of where Liverpool may slip up. And I think they will. They're not going to be perfect for the rest of the season. They still have a lot of tough away games. So I think they will drop points. But my concern is, does this Arsenal team have the attacking juice to go on and take advantage? Where are you at on that kind of headspace?
Yeah, I think they've got to get someone in, personally. I think before Jesus got injured, I think you could make an argument to say, you might be okay without bringing someone else in. But I just, look at it last night, and he basically got 4 fit forwards. I know
Kieran Tierney came on at
exactly. I mean, this is it. This is where you are.
Bale reincarnated.
Yeah, and it's, I think I know Waneri's going to come back and he will be another option in that attack, but he wasn't, in the squad building in the summer, his position was to be cover for Odegaard. It wasn't to be right wing cover. So I think they'll really like that. I think you're right about Havertz. I mean, he gets to a lot of work anyway, and he's obviously going through a difficult spell. For me, in terms of attack, I think they're at a point where I know Arteta's spoken about, we don't want to sign anyone for the sake of it, but I think they're close to that point where you literally need a body, like you need someone else in there just to give you something, even if it's, a loan deal. I just can't see how you can go through that sort of period of playing with 4 forwards as your option. And I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed it as well, but they kind of feel like there's been a bit of a change in Arteta's comments, like since the Jesus injury.
Definitely feels that way, yeah.
I mean, he said, oh, it's the same answer I've always given. And then I was like, well, you have given an answer, but not as bullish as this. I mean, even to TNT last night, he was like, yeah, for sure, we're trying to get someone in. Like, whereas before he was always, I know my players and focus on players. I think now the narrative, certainly from him, has kind of switched. And I don't think he would be saying that if he didn't think there was a realistic chance of getting someone in, because he's not, he's not an idiot. He's not want to, lead the fans on. So I feel like they've got to get someone in. Who that is, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, it just looks light up there. And as you say, Tierney playing left wing kind of says it all, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah. And in terms of the squad building, in my opinion, I think we all agree and think we need either a top class centre forward or another top class wide forward, right? Just someone else that can be of Saka's caliber and qualitative level that can compete and sustain a competitive level regularly. I think Havertz is, I think he looks burnt out, but it's as a result of not having someone to rotate in and around him. But I almost look at the forward group as a group, and it's like I only look at Saka as the option in that forward area that I think is top quality, that can be consistent enough. And then I almost look at Martinelli, Trossard, Havertz as like rotational options. So I do think we'd probably be looking to get a rotational option in anyway, as well as a top class one in the summer. And I'm thinking, if we can't get that top class one in the summer, do we just go for that kind of rotational option? I saw John Percy from the Telegraph citing Visser as an option today. Semenyo's been doing the rounds, and I feel like those players that can come in like Trossard in January, make an impact for the rest of the season, and then become a dependable squad player, I actually think is quite smart squad building. But what do you think about the type of player we need to be going for?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of the argument of like the Trossard kind of signing, isn't there? Get someone in that sort of 25 million, 20 million bracket, who has an impact now and then, becomes a squad sort of option. I mean, for me, with the striker one, I find it so interesting to see what they're going to do. And Arteta, he was quite interesting in the press conference before. He was like, I've got a very clear idea of what player we want, and obviously wouldn't say what that was or even the profile of it. But I kind of feel like for the forward one, if you were going to get someone in this month and you were going to accelerate the plans, I feel like Sesko is the kind of one who would fit that remit, just because it's pretty clear he's going to go in the summer anyway. If there's a way you could get Leipzig to persuade it now, and if there's a way you could get the budget done that you could spend it now and then you don't spend it in the summer, that's the one that I kind of feel like is the one you could do and accelerate the plans. I think this kind of cover for Saka and an option there, I think, is a definite need. But I think Jesus now getting injured means I think the priority has to be the striker, because Saka will be back hopefully March time. I think Waneri's looked pretty good there. There's some other options out there, whereas I feel like you're kind of asking Havertz to basically play 6 months as the sort of number 9. So that, if I was going for a striker, that would kind of be my desire, if you can bring forward the big one. I mean, I like someone like Wissa, but I would be wary about in the centre forward role having a sort of rotation option. I feel like out wide for Saka, if like Wissa was the sort of out wide Saka cover, I know you can't play it, but that sort of £25 million Saka cover I think would work well. I just think with the number 9, they need to kind of go big for it.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
It's so difficult with the money. I think it's so hard.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I don't know, in my head, I'm like, why would Leipzig let him go in January? I mean, I know, I think they're
doing all right in the
confirmed out.
Bundesliga, aren't they?
They are, but
they're
in
out of the Champions League. Yeah, but I think they're like 4th in the
they're
Bundesliga.
fourth in the
maybe third.
Bundesliga.
So
Yeah.
like, that's going to be a difficult one for them. And I think, I think their argument as well will be like, well, the market might be even bigger in the summer. We might have, there'll be others other than Arsenal. So, I mean, Arsenal, you'll probably be playing a decent premium. It feels like a hard one, just out of the options there. I mean, we know they like Sesko. Is the other thing. Like, they wanted him last summer. I think Isak, even in the summer, is going to be incredibly difficult to do. I mean, it'd be impossible now, pretty much. Gyökeres, I'm not too sure at 27 if he's someone you want to be dropping, 75 million on. So just looking at it, Sesko was the one I kind of thought, like, if you're going to bring one forward, because I don't think his wages would be crazy. And yeah, it's just one of those. I was chatting to a few people about just sort of friends and stuff, and everyone sort of giving different ideas. I mean, the one, if I could have a dream pick of who I'd have,
here you go.
I would have John Durand would be my pick.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if Arteta would. I don't know if Arteta would tolerate how he plays, but I was just thinking in terms of
how dare you take a long shot?
Yeah, exactly. But you think about these kind of like magic moments that Arteta always goes on about, and he's. Look at his goals from the season. He is just absolute box office and complete, chaos. I think it'd just be a really fun, exciting signing. I think it'd be a risk. I think, but that would be my sort of pick if I could have a sort of striker. I just think he's box office.
Fair play.
I'm not sure Mikel would think that way, but
yeah, that's genuinely the first shout I've seen for him. So if that happens, fair play. You're a visionary. One to keep an eye on. One person I wanted to talk about who was absolutely outstanding last night, Myles Lewis-Skelly, 18 years old. Like, I've actually watched him for the academy a couple of times because I live in Enfield, so I'm not too far from Bournemouth. So I go and watch them a fair bit. And I've seen him play for the academy as a 6. I've seen him play, I think, one half as an 8. I've seen him 2-3 times in this kind of inverted left back. Last night, he was absolutely outstanding. I think there's one thing with how he's kind of been brought into the team where he looks technically astute, but he looks like a man. And the way, I think you spoke earlier about Arteta citing the players needing to give the crowd moments to get up and get off their seats. Like when he clattered into Sarr, I think it was, that got me off my seat, and that hurt my injured foot. What a performance from him. The question I want to bring it back to is his long-term position. Where do you actually see it? Because I think he was known as a midfielder in the academy. We've obviously, I don't know what the actual deal is with Zubimendi. I don't know if it's officially confirmed or if there's still work to do, but it looks like we're going to try land him in the summer. Party Jorginho potentially leaving out of contract, so a bit of a midfield rebuild. But Lewis-Skelly's looking great at left back. How do you feel about his integration so far, and where do you see his long-term position for the club?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was so good. He was close to man of the match. I think Gabriel would just it. But Lewis-Skelly was right up there. I mean,
he was my one, to be fair. Yeah.
He was such. I mean, I think the stat was it was the last 18-year-old who started a North London derby in the league for Arsenal was Fabregas. In 2005. So, I mean, that's the kind of same breath you're talking about with a player like this. Physically, he's just. I mean, the biggest compliment I can give him is that he almost looks like the same build as Timber already. The two of them are just so sort of strong in the the 50-50. And we know Arteta loves duels, but he's just so bullish in those tackles. I mean, he's absolutely fearless. I thought in the first few minutes he did that great bit where he found Sterling with that pass.
Yeah,
and he just didn't really look back from there. It's just he's so confident on the ball, happy to take it.
Quite arrogant looking in a positive way.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I do think there'll probably come a point where he will make a mistake in that because he's so bold and so adventurous, and I'm sure Arteta knows that will come with it. But he's just willingness to take it, and I think people forget this is a role that is so hard to do. That's the thing that I'm so impressed about. You get 18-year-old to, an 18-year-old striker or winger who comes on, but he's playing probably one of the most tactically difficult roles, like an inverted left back. That is so hard. I mean, Kiwior couldn't do it, Tierney couldn't do it. This is something that a lot of players struggle to do. And I remember I did a piece on him and Ethan earlier this season. I was chatting to one of the coaches who had him at under 16s and a little bit under 18s. And I was like, it reminds me a bit of when Saka came through, he's playing left back and stuff. And he was like, no, because when Bukayo was in the youth teams, we played him left back occasionally, but Myles never played left back. That was never, he was always a midfielder. And he's basically managed to learn this new position in 4 or 5 months from pre-season into now. And his rise is so quick. I mean, for the first North London derby this season, he hadn't even made his debut for Arsenal. And now he's starting the next one. and it's a piece that I've written today for later on this afternoon. That, like, I think I don't know if you're picking your best left back at the moment. He's probably close to it. I mean, Calafiori maybe when he's back fit, but you'd hard to argue against Lewis-Skelly.
Yeah, he's got the shirt right now for sure.
Yeah, I think long term it'd be interesting to see where he does play. I mean, I enjoyed Rice comparing him to Dembele, and you can kind of see that a bit, can't you, with the way he sort of wriggles free. Yeah, I do wonder long term whether he might end up in that midfield area. I mean, I suppose obviously left back, it's a physical position, but putting an 18-year-old in the heart of the team maybe is a big ask. And Arteta maybe thought this was a way to integrate him in. But there's going to be gaps there, isn't there? Jorginho and Partey are going. But right now, I just think, yeah, keep him at left back. I mean, it's a long way off from, I think, England. But he'll also probably look at England and be like, oh, other than Lewis Hall, there's not masses of left backs,
Yep.
There's a World Cup in 18 months. If I can become Arsenal's left back, a great chance for him. But yeah, I thought he was brilliant. I loved his interview with Ian Wright afterwards.
So wholesome. He's just, he looks like he's just himself. There doesn't seem to be this kind of robotic personality behind him. He's just kind of enjoying it, being himself. And yeah, it was a great interview.
And I think for the fans as well, like, it is so cliche, but it just means something different, doesn't it? It's the same with Saka. Tottenham fans had it the same with Kane. When it is one of your academy players, there's no more enjoyment than that. He's a proper boyhood fan. He's been with Arsenal since under-8s. Kim coming through at the same time as Ethan. Like, it's great for Arsenal. I mean, you think of like the savings they'll make on Waneri and Lewis-Skelly, like keeping those two kids around.
Yeah, 100%. I think I look at Lewis-Skelly as like, I reckon Zinchenko will probably move on either January or in the summer. And we've got the ready-made replacement there already. So it saves some cash on that 100%. In terms of, Hey Len, like, what we're doing is crazy. And you think of Cheeto, that obviously went to Man United in terms of his talent as well. But is there anyone, Max Dallman's one that I think he's very young, right? So you don't want to kind of put too much pressure on him. But everyone's quite excited about him coming through. But is there anyone else that you're aware of in the academy that may be someone else like Waneri, Lewis-Skelly that can be fast-tracked into the team? Or is
Dallman's the one who keeps being, sort of mentioned. I think there's something in the Premier League regs that he couldn't. I don't know if he would have been anyway, but I don't think he could have been in the squad this season. I think you have to be like 15 at the start. You have to be under 16s at the start of the season, I think, to be in a match day squad. But the amount he's training with the first team is like crazy for like a 14-year-old kid. And I just was sort of looking through the compilation of sort of stats for him, and it's like plays for the under 18s when he's 13, like youngest UEFA league, basically all the records. He's just got all of them.
Yeah.
And the excitement around him, I think, is pretty high. And it reminds me a bit of Waneri, where Arsenal are kind of trying to make it as clear as possible. Like, this is the path we're giving you. This is how we see it. We're training with the first team, all this sort of stuff. And I think for Arsenal, there's going to be so many clubs who are going to want Dallman before he signs that pro deal. But they literally now have the perfect examples of Waneri and Lewis-Skelly. Like, to him, like, look, if you're good enough when you're 17, 18, you could be starting North like that. Is literally, it's a perfect example, I think. And any more than Arsenal will say, those actions alone with how Waneri and Lewis-Skelly have been developed, I think is their best weapon. And it does make me come back to Cheeto. I was chatting to someone about it the other day. Obviously, he's complete with his rights to move clubs, but he probably would have had a few games this season, Cheeto. Given the attacking, he was above Kabir and Butler or JG in the youth teams. Like, he probably would have had some games this season. So, it is, it's a shame to lose a player like that. See how he goes on. But I do think with him, like, you could have had a chance here. You would have probably started a few, maybe not started, but come off the bench, or certainly been involved in squads.
I think like he would have made a match day squad or 200%.
Yeah,
especially over the
like
FA
Carabao Cup games. And
yeah. So interesting. But
so it's a shame.
I love the sentence that people say where they're like, "How have we spawned these talents?" I love it, and it's true. It looks like with Waneri, Lewis-Skelly, as well as Saka already established. What we've found there is absolutely incredible. And I think what you say about Lewis-Skelly and the kind of comparisons to Timber and Dembele, like, again, I'm always quite not skeptical but reserved when it comes to young talent, just because I feel, I don't know, there's so many factors outside of our and their control that can contribute to the progress in their career, but it's hard not to be excited. And like the one thing I love about Timber is that kind of shoulder drop and his ability to change direction and pivot. And Lewis-Skelly looks like he has that. His ability to ride a tackle. I think, yeah, you can understand the kind of Dembele comparisons as well. So super exciting. One thing I want to shift attention to, it's going to sound like a bit of a downer, and it's not intended this way, but it's impossible to ignore the kind of general narratives and feelings that was around the club prior to last night. I'm very crystal clear in my head on where I think we're at as a football club in the journey and the process. And I know people hate those words, processes, but I'd just love to hear from your perspective how you've assessed Arteta's time since he came in, and feel free to put your own timeline there in milestones. But how do you feel like we're performing and where we are as a football club at the minute?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's done a pretty amazing job personally. I think it is always difficult with the sort of discourse. Rice touched on it post match, didn't he, between sort of online and fans who go to the stadium. And I always think with Arteta, the difficult period he had at the start, during empty stadiums. So we never really kind of found out what the reaction would have been like in the ground when all of that was going on and they were having a difficult run. And then almost when they got fans back, there was almost the excitement of fans just excited at being back. And it kind of like, not the results didn't matter, but it almost wasn't as important as it kind of was. And people were so happy to be back. But he has sort of built on that connection with the fans. I think in the stadium, it's, the atmosphere is certainly, the end of Emery was kind of pretty. Apathy was probably the thing, wasn't it? I mean, people weren't angry. They just didn't really care anymore, which is probably almost worse, probably like.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I got a season ticket, but in that period, I felt like I was going for the sake of it. I felt so apathetic. Yeah, you're bang on.
I remember that Frankfurt game, the last one, where there was like barely anyone there.
People wanted us to lose so he would get the boot.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird game. So I think, the sort of, the cultural rebuild he's done, within the squad, cleaning out the dressing room, changing the mood around the club. And I think people forget, this is his first ever job, first job. And then there's a lot of, he kind of brought it up the other day. He was half head of the Man United game. And it was, Amarim's a bit like you because he's coming in mid-season. He's trying to do a cultural rebuild. And Arteta was like, yeah, but he's been a manager. He was successful at Sporting and other jobs. That was Arteta's first job. And then he had a global pandemic in the middle of it. So I think he kind of deserves a huge amount of credit for what he's done. He probably hasn't got the rewards in terms of trophies that he deserves, I think. Deserves.
I know what you mean.
Say you haven't deserved, but I think they've been good enough to win a trophy. They've played good enough football. And it's just kind of that last step. And I really feel like once he's won a sort of a Premier League or a Champions League, that sort of level of trophy, I think a lot of the discourse around him will kind of ease. But until he has it will kind of stick with him a bit like it did with Poch at Spurs, where you've done this great thing, you've built this exciting team, young players, but they need to get over the line, which I think they will. I think that squad's too good not to win something big. But for me, I think he's done a remarkable job, and I think sometimes it kind of gets lost a bit where this team was when he came in.
Yeah, I do think so. I do think this season feeds a lot of that kind of discourse and narrative as well, where Man City have obviously largely dropped off. And I think if you said that to us last season, we'd all be like, oh, so it's going to be us. And Liverpool have kind of been there. So how much do you think this season is kind of feeding into that? And how do you assess this season so far in terms of expectations versus reality?
Yeah, I do wonder if there's a bit of emotional fatigue with the fans, almost like when you come so close 2 years in a row and then the team you were chasing falter and you're not the ones there. That is difficult to sort of accept. I think they've done pretty well in the circumstances, Arsenal. Odegaard out for months, this Saka injury now. Some very debatable red cards. A lot of kind of, as you say, the injuries they obviously had some big ones, but a lot of them have just been constant little injuries. There's not had I would struggle to think Arteta's had many times where he's had everyone fit. And I know other teams have issues, but it kind of feels like there's always been something.
There was a period where I'm sure he said in a press conference, in terms of actually training, he only had 13 available squad players or something as well.
And he is always someone who I always remember him saying years ago that he doesn't like moving too many pieces. He'd rather just like make one change rather than 2 or 3. But he's had games like I think of that Fulham game where he's sort of moving people around to get everyone in. So there's been a lot of disruption. I mean, we'll probably talk about the midfield in a bit with Zubimendi, but I was working on a piece for tomorrow, and in the Premier League they've had 13 different midfield combinations. Arsenal,
wow,
and the main one, Party, Rice, and Odegaard have started 6 games together, and beyond that, the most a pair have started together is twice.
oh wow.
So like they have basically, I mean, the midfield has been kind of a revolving door of trying to work out.
I reckon the back four would be similar as well when we break down the stats.
And I remember there was a stat early on the season. It was like 7 back fours in 10 league games. So they've been lucky with injuries in the past 2 seasons, and it feels like this one they've just been hit so hard. And I think they've done well to get where they are. I think it's and Arteta has made that point of it's been really difficult. So it's been like I think they've done well in the circumstances. The probably one issue you'd say is the football's not been, it's not been enjoyable, not been that entertaining. Again, I think Arteta would point to the injuries and the issues they've had there, but I think that probably hasn't helped. Like if they were on the same sort of number of points they are now, but the performances had been different in terms of the style, I think it'd be a bit more slack. But I kind of think people have just, it's been a tough watch at times. Like, like I'm sure you'll say it as a fan, but like some of the games are just like, this is not...
definitely. Like the Everton one comes to mind, Ipswich as well. Like there's been a few that have definitely been a tough watch. Brighton, after we got the first goal, that was a tough watch.
But I think like in years gone by, City were like a bit like this at times. Like they didn't really find their click into a gear. I know Arsenal's going to be harder to do that because they've obviously they're going to missing Saka, but just staying in that fight for as long as you can, even when you're not playing that well, will be a big thing for them. And just trying to be there or thereabouts. So I think they've done pretty solid given the circumstances.
I do too. Is like the whole aesthetics of how we've played as well. I'm firmly in the camp of I think it's a clear correlation between the knock-on impact of everything, and I do think there is that element of Arsenal have hit a bit of a ceiling in terms of how we attack against low blocks, and I think in terms of what we can coach in open play, I really believe we're at a level now where we do need that kind of unpredictability that you touched on to kind of take us to a new level. But in the same way, when Jesus came in 22-23 and transformed the attack, I think another attacker will come in and have the same impact to a similar level anyway. But on Arteta as well, just in terms of the timeline, I do feel like I'm on my own sometimes in my own little world where I look at his time as different chapters. When he first came in, the title was not in my consciousness at all. It was, for me personally, can this guy get us back to being a top 4 team? And I almost think the 22-23 season with an unexpected title challenge, like super fast tracked everyone's expectations. And I almost look at it as like, if Mikel Arteta came in as a manager to reestablish us as a top 4, then got sacked, and a new manager came in for the 23-24 season, where would the expectations be? And I feel like it's almost because he's been there for so long, people don't really break it down into those chapters. And I'm someone, I don't know why or how I have this ability to think very long term, because I am of that generation that I'm instant gratification, I'm everything. But if you can give me 3 to 5 years of Mikel Arteta and the processes in place that yield the outcomes that we're hoping for, I think he's the manager that we have the best chance of doing it with. And it's everything. It's not just the kind of tactical side of things. It's everything in the way he gets the values of the club. You spoke about the cultural rebuild there. And even like, I don't know how to put this into words, but he seems like someone that's so open to learning all the time and kind of acknowledging his flaws and where we can get better. I feel so safe with him at the helm. And yeah, I don't know. I do feel as well, like if Liverpool and Man City had the same set of circumstances this season, I don't think people would be expecting them to challenge for the league, which I think speaks to the volume of how good we are and he is. So yeah, I found the discourse. Like, I think criticism's always fair, but the extremity of it, I found it mind blowing, to be honest. And I don't know, like when a Man City kind of set this warped perception that you're always going to hit 85 points minimum as well. Like, and
I mean, last season, you think of last season, like I mean, winning 16 out of your last 18 league games and not winning the league, like that is just, I mean, crazy to do that and not win the league. And so, I mean, I just think that City level makes it so difficult. And I do agree with you. I think that 22-23 season where they kind of just suddenly accelerated past where the project was meant to be. And I do think of that season though, it was a bit of a weird season because of the World Cup. Like if it had just been a normal season, would things have been different? I mean, I really, really think if Saliba hadn't got injured, that they would have won the league. Like I genuinely think, I just think they would have gone on and done it. Like they were just so short on the back there. But yeah, it's one of those things, and I think it is probably social media feeds into it, but it feels like the mood flips pretty quick on Arteta and players, like result based, and it's hard to not do that yourself, isn't it? Obviously, when they have a bad game and a bad run, but I think if you just look at it an overall picture, I can't think how you can come out of it and be Arteta hasn't done a good job or a great job.
Yeah, and this way I'm going to open myself up to hate here, but I am someone that I think when we're looking back at his career in 20 years' time, I think we'll be laughing because I really think we'll be looking back at a manager that is remembered as one of the greats of this period. I really think he's got the ability to go on and achieve a lot. I just hope it's with us, but I do worry about the kind of patience of the fan base sometimes. That kind of feeds into the next topic, and we'll look to go through the final few before we get out of here. But the summer transfer window from last summer has started to come into question with a lot of people talking about Calafiori, Marino, Neto was obviously on loan, Sterling on loan. How do you kind of assess last summer's transfer window?
Yes, I mean, at the time, I thought it was a pretty decent window. I don't know, called like a sort of B grade window. I thought Calafiori was a good signing. I thought Neto was. I mean, it's hard to get excited about a backup goalkeeper. I thought he was fine, one, right? Solid. I mean, the issue couldn't play the Carabao Cup. I think you could argue was a bit of an oversight. Moreno. I mean, Moreno's such a difficult one. I'm trying to reserve judgment on him until he's had a sort of full pre-season and a chance to sort of get up to speed, because I kind of feel like in patches he looks quite good. Like in sort of he's had odd 20-minute cameos where he's looked quite good, but it just feels like he's not really there at the moment. And I do come back to the summer he had no pre-season with Sociedad, injured in his first training session, and I always remember listening to podcast, the Overlap podcast with Neville and Carragher and Rooney, and they were sort of randomly talking about pre-season on one of them, and they were just like, when you miss that, you just never get it back. You're always playing catch up, and you never get it back in your legs. And I do wonder with him, just he's come into the Premier League, he's had no pre-season, got injured. Is he just constantly trying to catch up? So I'm kind of reserving judgment on him. I mean, for me, I'm probably, I'm very different to Arteta. He wouldn't have been the number 8 I'd have signed. I'd have wanted an Eze, or I'd have had Smith Rowe play there or something. That's how I would envision it. But obviously for Arteta, I think he wanted that kind of ball-winning, dual monster as he was. And if you look at the stats, I did it a few weeks ago. I don't know if they're still similar now, but he's sort of number 1 in the Arsenal squad for tackles, blocks, aerial duels. He's second for interceptions. He's basically all the stuff that you thought he would do, he is good at.
Yeah.
So I kind of reserve judgment on him. And then the attack, there's obviously no way that they went into that window and Arteta was like, just get me Sterling on loan and I'll be happy.
No. Well, you said we did try for Sesko, right? And I'm sure I remember seeing we tried for a winger, but I forgot who that was.
Yeah, now. Williams they wanted.
That was it.
And then you come to that debate, don't you? I mean, some people were saying, should you have put more of your budget in the attack and gone all there? I guess the sort of argument from Arsenal would be, look, we couldn't get who we wanted in attack, so we spent the money on someone we do want in midfield and defence. And that has been Arsenal's sort of policy with transfers. They're if they can't get who they want, they've been pretty resolute in standing firm. Obviously, they pivoted with Trossard and Mudryk. But normally, when they can't get who they want, they sort of wait. Even Zubimendi, I think they've liked for a long time, and they've waited. The merits of that can be debated. I think Sterling's, I think I was kind of a bit excited about Sterling just because of the Arteta connection, point to prove. it felt like it was a gamble. Obviously, I think the wages were very reasonable, sort of similar to what Nelson's being paid, but it felt like a sort of gamble that was worth doing, but it's just not really worked out. And then I think it's been compounded by Odegaard, Saka's injuries, because this attack, I think Arteta always brings it up. He's like, we scored the most goals Arsenal ever have in a Premier League season last year. So like, how are you improving that attack? My argument would be you've got to kind of move on. You need to strengthen when you're in a good position. And I don't think they did that, but I would like to think that, either January or this summer, that attack looks different by the time Arsenal kick off next season.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't want to be one of those fans that's like, oh, they tried, but it's not like they've not actively tried to pursue someone in that position. Like, I remember trying for Rafinha a few years ago, and then you spoke about Mudryk there.
God, I'd have loved Rafinha. What a player he is.
Me too. But yeah, you spoke about the pivot from Mudryk to Trossard. We spoke about Sesko, Nico Williams. But I do feel like in this PSR world, I know Swiss Ramble did a piece where like we're fine, but you do have to be aware of the 3-year cycle, and I do think that probably played an element where the season before we went huge on Rice, Havertz, Timber. And I do wonder if they're planning ahead where maybe they're looking at 2025 as the summer where they can maybe go big. We've spoken about Zubimendi a few times, but I don't look at anyone that moved offensively last summer as like, yeah, we should have gone for them. Like, it was a bit of a weird summer in the attacking area in the transfer window.
Those windows are always, major tournament windows are normally kind of tougher to do deals. A, because the window to get players is smaller because they're away. B, you've got the kind of tax of if someone has a good tournament, they're suddenly more expensive. So they're normally not necessarily the windows where you get the big moves. And Arsenal were, certainly last season, January time, were tight on the PSR stuff. And it is right, that has eased. Obviously selling Smith Rowe and Ketia. But I think people do forget with the Kroenkes, like they've always had it as a self-sustainable model. Like that's the way they kind of run the franchises, their sports teams. And they did invest heavily when they dropped out of the Champions League, almost like to kind of stop the bleeding. And they went again. I do think they will put money in, but there will always be, it's just the way they kind of run the club and have run the club. Like they will always want to get, a return on their investment. They won't want to keep just ploughing money in. And I think they're in a better position to do that now. I think the squad's got much more sellable assets. Like talk about people like Zinchenko and stuff. I think you get money for them.
Yeah, and that's where, without being brutal, it's gutting about Jesus, both from us missing him playing wise, but also from a sellable asset. Like that's not really one we've got anymore. Which sounds
I was thinking he'd have had a good run like now until the summer. Like if he'd carried on this sort of form, you suddenly be like, oh, like he finishes the season with like 13, 14 goals. You think, oh, you probably get a decent fee from now. Whereas now he's not going to be back until September, October time, so you are kind of stuck with him a bit. But that's just where they are.
Yeah. And final couple of questions before we get out of here. One is related to, we've spoken a lot about the transfer window. Edu obviously left. Do you have any insight into the kind of processes and stakeholders that are involved now and how that works? Because Zubimendi's one that I remember reading the article and it said we've been kind of pursuing him for 12 months. So do you have any insight on what a transfer process looks like now Edu's
Yes. Gone? So, I mean, Jason Ato, who was Edu's number 2, is basically in the interim charge and is in the running to where he's put himself forward to try and get the job full time. I think he'd have a fairly good chance. I mean, Arsenal historically have promoted from within quite a lot. Garlic was promoted when Vinay left. Even things like when Jack Wilshere left, they promoted the under-18s assistant manager. Edu got a promotion to sporting director. Like they do historically like to promote from within. They don't normally bring in many external hires. Even James King, who's come back in to do Garlick's old job, used to work at the club. So I think Ato has got a chance in that sense. It would be a risk. He's obviously not done a big job like that. And in terms of transfers, this was something that we sort of put to Arteta when Edu left, because he left in November and you got 2 months to the January window. And he was like, well, the planning's already been done. They plan windows in advance. They don't just get to December and be like, right, who are we going to get in January? Like they've got a big recruitment team, like below Jason Ato, you've got James Ellis, who works as part of the recruitment team. They've got people under them. They kind of shifted a few years ago to a bit more of a data-driven model. They got rid of a lot of scouts. They did bring some more back, but they are quite into the data side. So they would have known the targets that they wanted. And I don't think they would have dramatically changed when Edu went, because they're kind of done as a collective, like the recruitment team, Edu, Arteta, ultimate sign-off obviously comes from the Cronkies, but they all kind of feed in together and discuss things. So even though it is a blow losing the sporting director, I think the recruitment setup as a whole and how Arsenal want to run the club is that it won't fall apart if one piece of the jigsaw moves. Like it will keep working. So someone like Zubimendi, I think they've liked for a long time. I think would be a very exciting signing. Be interesting what it does with Rice and where he plays.
That kind of brings up exactly one of the other questions, and we'll end on this one actually with Zubimendi. Yeah, what do you think we'll be getting? And the question was, would you be in support of a formation change? And I guess I'll just add to that. Do you think that is where we're heading?
Would be interesting to see. I mean, he's been quite wedded to this 4-3-3 Arteta. And I remember really early on when he was playing the back three, which obviously they won the FA Cup with, and he was like, well, I want to play 4-3-3, basically, and not in the exact words. I want to play 4-3-3, but I haven't got the players to do it. So I think he's always wanted to have this way of playing. Yeah, I mean, but they kind of played a 4-2-3-1 for a bit. So it would be interesting to see. And he likes being unpredictable, doesn't he? I mean, I think with Zubimendi, you are signing an out-and-out number 6.
Feels like a young Jorginho, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking when it was sort of the news fully broke from the Daily Mail from Sammy that they were in for him, and I was like, the first article I found was calling him a Gen Z Sergio Busquets, which I thought was quite funny. But if you look at his stats, I mean, he basically is that kind of metronomic figure at the base midfield. And as Jorginho comparison is, I think, is quite a good example as well. And I think if he's there and that's basically where he plays. He's not really an 8. I think he basically sits there. For me, it just points to Rice being that sort of number 8 role.
Yeah.
Where he was second half of last season. I always liked him as a number 6, but I can kind of see the attraction of having him in that number 8 role. In that interview he gave with TNT Sports, I thought he spoke really well. Just like, I get so excited. I just love it. And he does all action. Press. Yeah, he's like a sort of wild horse up there, isn't he? He's just pressing everywhere, wins the ball high up the pitch.
I've said so many times, Declan Rice sometimes feels like he was born in the wrong generation. He feels prime Sean Bassett 4-4-2 midfielder. Like.
Yeah. He's a Barclays man at heart.
He is.
And I kind of get that attraction. I think he finished last. I think it's 7 goals, 8 assists in the Premier League last year, which is pretty good. Like if he adds that to his game, I think he'd be a great player. And then I almost think he needs to have a settled role in the team. I know it is a great thing that he's versatile, can play both, but I think almost for him just to be like, right, you are playing left number 8. This is where we want you. Odegaard there, Zubimendi there. Let's go. I think almost flicking between the two doesn't really help him. And it has been noticeable in the last 5 games, he's always come on and played as the number 8. And in what Arteta seems like his best midfield 3 this season, the party Odegaard Rice is the number 8 as well. So maybe the clues have always been there that when they recruit, they're going to get the number 6. And I guess that means Moreno's kind of your backup Declan Rice, which he sort of is in a way, I guess. Maybe he's, Yeah,
and that's fine if we're using him in that role in the squad, right?
I think it does. And I think people would probably find it a lot more palatable if you were like, no, Moreno's not in the first. He's like a squad player. He's a great, he's for those sort of difficult, your Brentford aways where he was quite good. Those sort of games, that's where you bring him in. But I think that midfield area is going to be really interesting to see how it sort of moves, because it always needed a refresh with Partey and Jorginho, both over 30, both out of contract, and kind of where it goes next, particularly if you've got one area in there, Lewis-Skelly, and also good from the club that they've seemingly got this kind of laid out with Zubimendi. I don't think it's sort of done and dusted. But it sounds pretty advanced. And I spoke to someone yesterday at the game who was sort of saying, it's been bubbling away for a few months and it's ramped up over the past week or so. And that's how it's probably kind of leaked out, because it's getting sort of down the line a bit. But if you can get that planning in place, I mean, it make a huge difference. Like that, I always think the best seasons and windows Arsenal have always been where they've done that early business. You think with Jesus and Zinchenko, Declan Rice, Timber, both on that tour already. So if they can get that done early, no summer tournament, I think that would be absolutely massive.
100%. So the quad is on next season, is all I'm hearing.
With John Duran up front.
Exactly. And Visser in there as well to seal the Champions League final for us next year. Simon, this has been an absolute pleasure. Honestly, talking Arsenal is one of my favourite things to do. Really enjoyed this. Where can people follow all of your work? And another plug as well. I've enjoyed seeing you on TalkSport's Inside Gooners show.
Oh, thank you.
Really enjoyed that this season.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at SR_Collings. And then I am on Blue Sky, but I don't know anyone who can reel off their Blue Sky handle. It's an absolute mouthful. But yeah, I'm on there. I do a few appearances here, there, and everywhere. But yeah, thanks, everyone. I absolutely loved it. I always enjoy having a good natter, and particularly when the mood is slightly lifted from what I feared it was going to be. So.
Yeah, me too. And if you are watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you too like listening to a natter, drop the stream a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss when we go live. And if you're listening on podcast, please give it a 5-star review. I'll be back tomorrow with Lee Jackson, who is the Aston Villa correspondent for Planet FPL, to preview the game on Saturday, and then we'll do a review of that on Sunday. Simon, thanks as always. Fingers crossed the rest of the season is a positive one, as it has felt today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Up the Arsenal.